They executed in 1993 JF paper document the momentum phenomenon. There are literally hundreds of thousands of papers on momentum, and by far there's convincing evidence. Excuse me. Momentum is pervasive and persistent. For example, Schwab 2003 find the momentum is only implementable anomaly that is still persistent after its publication. Griffin, G, and Martin in 2003, and Ashley Moskowitz and Peterson 2013 both show that momentum exists in different countries, different market, different asset classes. Moreover, Moskowitz, Roy, and Peterson 2012 JFE paper document another momentum, that's the time series momentum. And they also show that it's pervasive across different asset classes. But one thing to point out is the momentum, or different momentum strategies documented in the literature, mostly at monthly level and some of at weekly level. In this paper, we're going to look at a different momentum, which is called intraday momentum. So what is intraday momentum? It's a phenomenon that the first half-hour return, we call R1, of a trading day predicts the last half-hour return of the same trading day, which we'll call R13, because if you separate the days into half hours, they are total 13 trading half hours. Notice that when we calculate the first half-hour return, we start from the previous day closing price. So basically, we capture the overnight returns as well. We find that intraday momentum mainly exists in the stock market, and we believe or we suspect is likely driven by the trading behavior of day traders and informed traders, which is again heavily affected by the periodic open and close of the market. That's why we believe it's a phenomenon unique to stock market, because other markets like futures market or currency market, basically you can trade 24 hours, so there's no open and close. So I'll give you the main result because I don't believe I can finish all the tables, and I didn't actually include all the tables. So first look at the statistical significance. The ensemble R-square of the predict regressions using R1 alone is 1.6%. If we add the 12 half-hour return, which is the return just before the last half hour, we have 2.6%. Now if you are familiar with the predictability literature, this numbers is nothing small. So it's actually comparable to the monthly predicted predictors. Now also do outer sample test. The outer sample R-square is about 1.2% if you only have R1, and increase to 1.8 if you add R12. We also do economical significance, and the first one we look at is the market timing, which basically just use the sign of R1. The timing strategy generates average return 6.67% per annum, which means we annualize the return. But notice that it may not sound a big number, but notice first of all, we only trade in the last half hour. Okay, so if the R1 is positive, we long the market in the last half hour. If the sign of R1 is negative, we short the market only in the last half hour. And then end of the market close, we close the position, whether it's long or short. So you can see that as a result, the standard deviation is much smaller. So the Sharpe ratio is very high. And give you another way to look at the performance is we have some benchmarks. One of the benchmarks we use is the buy and hold strategy, which basically you're looking at the daily market return. So in this case, you are in the market all the time. So we look at basically a daily market return. Now it's generally comparable returns, but has much higher standard deviation because you are in the market all the time. Thus a very lower Sharpe ratio. Now the second economic significance test is not just look at the sign, but also look at the forecast magnitude of last half hour. In that case, we use mean variance analysis. Again, we only invest in the last half hour. It generates about the same average return, but in this case we use certainly equivalent utility gains relative to using the historical average. So it's 6.35% and 6.44% per annum. We also do a lot of robustness using different portfolio weights restrictions, so change the investors' risk aversion coefficient results hold. We also find the predictability and profitability of intraday momentum are stronger when the volatility or the trading volume in the first half hour is higher, and also during recessions and on days when there are certain micro news releases. It's only significant on the days when the first half hour is positive. It's very weak or insignificant when the first half hour return is negative. It can easily survive the transaction cost and is not caused by bid-ask sponsors. In fact, bid-ask sponsors, if you control bid-ask sponsors, actually increase the performance. It's not a specific phenomenon to the market or the S&P 500 ETF we use. We can identify the same intraday momentum for other active traded ETFs, including domestic and international indices, small and large indices, sector indices, and bond index. But it's not it does not exist in the currency market and the futures market. So that's the main result. So let me go to data and methodology. So basically we use, as I mentioned previously, SP 500 ETF, which is SPY, as the main testing assets. We use intraday trading prices and quotes from that tag data set. And basically we use all available intraday prices for the SPY, which start from February 1993 all the way to December 31st, 2013. But we do exclude any trading days with fewer than 500 trades. Just make sure we got enough trading volume. We calculate returns, just use simple return. We did also do log return, we got a similar result. Now one thing I want to point out again is that when we calculate the first half hour return, the P0 here done in the denominator is the previous day's closing price. So we capture the overnight return. So this is the first result, that's the in-sample test. So if we use R1, which is the first half hour return as the predictor, we get significant coefficient positive and significant R squared is 1.6. R12 is also positive significant, meaning there's an autocorrelation between R12 and R13 returns. R squared is 1.1. If you put two together, the R squared is almost the sum of these two, which suggests that R1, R2, the predictability of R1, R12 are independent, which also show up here because the coefficients are basically the same. This is the whole sample period. We also look at financial crisis. Surprisingly, in financial crisis, the predictability is actually stronger for all the regressions, R1 alone, R12 alone, and both. Now, for both R1 and 12, the R squared is 6.1%, which is fairly high by any standard. Of course, if we exclude the financial crisis, we get some weaker results, but the coefficients are still highly significant. Okay, so this is the in-sample result. But the result here in the financial crisis is kind of interesting. One of the predominant feature of financial crisis is reflected in the stock market is heightened volatility. So we want to examine the impact of volatility to predictability. So here we estimate the first half hour volatility using the minute by minute returns. And then sort the days into three different categories: days with lowest volatility, days with medium volatility, and days with highest volatility, and do the same predicted regression. Here we only use the last specification where we have two returns here, R1 and R12. You can see that with the low volatility, R square is only 0.6%, but it increased to 3.3% on the days with very high volatility. Okay? So this is the in-sample result. Of course, we know from Welsh and Goyer 2008, in-sample predictability does not necessarily require out-sample predictability. So we need to do out-sample test. So basically, we do rolling regressions and look at the average of the coefficient and calculate R12 using this formula, which is first used by Campbell and Thompson 2008. Basically, out-of-sample R12 is a comparison of how much explained by the predictive regression versus how much is explained by the historical average. Okay? If it is positive, that means predictive regression outperform using historical average. That means there is out-of-sample predictability. So here's the result. If we use R1 alone, coefficient significant, 1.2% R squared. Using R12, still significant, and if we put these two together, we get higher R squared, but both coefficients are significant. So by now we have shown that in both in-sample and out-sample, we see strong evidence for intraday momentum. The next question is what economic forces drives. We don't have theory. There's no theory we can use. We can't provide any theory, but we do have two intuitive stories or explanations. One is based on the trading behavior of day traders. So think about on any day when the first half hour returns up substantially, some day traders may expect price reversion and go short, provide liquidity. These traders will almost surely unwinding their positions and go flat before the market closes. Okay? Now, some of the traders may choose to unwind in the last half hour. Others may not. But on the days when the first half hour is significantly positive, because this position, in fact, those traders may postpone the unwinding of their losing positions. So, but they will close eventually at the end of market trading. So, meaning in the last half hour. So, as a result, there would be a lot more unwinding of losing positions when the first half hour return is up. And because the buying or the closing covering their short position in the last half hour of the day traders, the price will continue to go up in the last half hour. Okay, so that's one story. And the second story is based on the strategic trading of informed traders. There are theoretical papers, for example, Amati and Flater, 1988, show theoretical that informed traders will time their trades for high trading volume periods. Now, in the context of intraday trading, the high trading volume periods are the first half hour and the last half hour. It's a perfect U-shape if you look at the trading volume. In the first half hour and last half hour, there are tons of tradings, but in the middle, the trading is pretty small. Based on different preference, Hara 2006 also shows that an optimal trading strategy is to trade rapidly at both at the beginning and end of the trading period, and slowly in the middle. So again, in the context of intraday trading, it's in the first half hour and the last half hour. Okay? So when there are good news, presumably informed traders will buy in the first half hour to push up the price, and they will continue to buy in the last half hour to push the price even further. Okay? So that's our explanations. So it critically depends on the trading volume. So in this slide, we examine the direct impact of trading volumes on the predictability. So again, similar to the volatility, we use the first half hour of trading volume and separate the trading days into 3 different categories and run the predict regressions. We can see that as trading volume increases, R squared increases, and also the coefficients become more significant and higher. So now we turn to economic significance of intraday momentum. As I said, this is the market timing. When R1 is positive, we long the market, and when R1 is negative, we short the market. In this case, we use both R1 and R12. So when both are positive, we are in the market. When both are negative, we short the market. But when they have different signs, we are out of the market. We don't invest. Okay? So if you look at the average return, 6.67%. As I mentioned, separation is 1.8. And we have two benchmarks. Always long, meaning we always in the market for the last half hour, regardless of the sign of the first half hour. Buy and hold is the one I want to talk about. So if you look at the average return always long, it's actually negative 1.1% a year with comparable volatility. So separation is actually negative. Buy and hold generates similar returns but with very high volatility. So again, separation is a lot lower. But separation is not intuitive when you compare different strategies. So we use a related measure, which is the M2 measure. So intuitive M2 measure is the average return if you level up the timing strategy so that it has the same volatility as the benchmark. Now in this case, the benchmark is the buy and hold. So if we level up the timing strategy to have the same volatility of this guy, then the equivalent average return is about 22%. You can also see that these timing strategies have positive skewness and access ketosis, while the market basically has negative skewness. So which means we get a lot more chance of positive, big positive returns. The success rate is also higher than 50%. If you look at focus on R1, R12, this is smaller. It's basically because a lot of time we are out of the market, so the return is zero. This is the second analysis using mean variance portfolio. We restrict the portfolio is between negative 0.5 and 1.5. So basically, we allow borrowing short 50% on the margin. You can see average return. This is our benchmark. If you use the average return, historic average to predict next day R13, it's about 0.46%. Okay? But if you use R1, you get 6.85%. Using R12 generate lower return, but using both generate even higher return with very high Sharpe ratios. And the next, we look at the microeconomic effect. So first, we look at this effect by business cycles. So we have expansion and recession. You can see clearly, even though in both periods, the market timing performance generate higher returns, or probability in recession is much higher. Now we look at the impact of micro news release. Now the reason we look at it is because we see previously volatility and trading volume has direct impact on the probability and the predictability. Now the source of trading tend to be news release. So that's why we check some of the micro news release. And we use 4 Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, GDP, Consumer Price Index, and the release of minutes of Federal Open Market Committee. So this is the predicting regression. That's the predictability test. We can see on the days without release is pretty much 2.6, 2.5%. On the days with Consumer Sentiment Index release, it jumped to 5.5. On the days with GDP release 3.0 and 5.0 for CPI. And it's remarkable when they are news release for FOMC, it jumped to 11%. So I'll skip that. This is the performance. Quickly, this is the when we look at separating the first half hour is positive versus negative. We see only significance here, not down here. And then we check about what about other ETF? Is it specific to the SPY? So we use a bunch of different ETFs. We see that significance all over the place. And then we check other assets. We use currencies and oil and gold prices, and we don't see much pretty big.
Discuss this. It was a very interesting paper. I thought the results were very robust. It's hard to. I'll talk a little bit about it, but it's hard to argue that there's nothing going on here. So, just to summarize, this is the thing I like a lot about this paper is the title does a good job of summarizing the main result. If you read the title, you know kind of what's going on. Intraday. So I just copied and pasted the title. Intraday Momentum. The first half hour predicts the last half hour return. Okay, so Yufeng and his co-authors do a good job of showing this. I'm not arguing that this is not happening. And they look at these different sub-samples and they show that when it's stronger, when it's not quite as strong. And interestingly, this doesn't seem to be happening in this specific types of ETFs, currencies, and commodities. So I'm not going to go through most of the results. I'm going to focus on the main result and the interpretation. So he gave this interpretation, this possible interpretation that day traders, there's good news before the market opens. There's going to be a lot of buying. Maybe they're providing liquidity, and they're going to have to cover those shorts by the end of the day, and they're going to do that near the end. They want to be neutral. Or it could be some informed trading. They're going to want to hide their trades a little bit when there's more liquidity, or at least to reduce some of the costs. It could be something else. So I have another possible interpretation. I don't know if that's the right interpretation, but it's something that I think is consistent with what I'm going to show you. Okay, so this is an interesting paper. It's well written. They do a good job of explaining the methodology. My main comments have to do with the title, even though I said I liked the title, and the interpretation. So you'll see what I mean in a second. Okay, so let me just show what the main result is. So they have this green is when the market's open. These are half-hour periods here. This is the overnight period here. And so they're using R1, and Yufeng was upfront about this, they're clear about this in the paper. It includes the overnight return. It stops at 10 a.m., and they're predicting this last half-hour return. Okay, so I was able to replicate this. Here was kind of the main result. The magnitude is very similar. If you're using the 12th half-hour period, you get very similar results as you got in the paper. They seem to be kind of orthogonal to each other. R-squareds look pretty similar. Okay, so first thing I thought was, well, is it coming from the overnight return, or is it coming from the 9:30 or from the 9:30 to 10 a.m.? So let's split that, and let's just see which of these is driving this. So I did that. Here is the overnight return. I'm going to call it RON, and you get pretty strong results there. So it seems like a lot of power is coming from the overnight return. R1 star would be the 9:30, the open to 10 a.m. return, and you don't really see much going on there. The point estimate's negative. So maybe, I'm not sure some of your stories, your possible interpretations, I don't know if you can rule them out. It depends on how you explain that. And they seem to be orthogonal to each other. So a lot of it's coming from the overnight return. So let's go back to the title. I don't know if this is the right title anymore. So maybe we can say overnight, I don't know. But I think it's still interesting, and nobody's shown this before, and I think there's something clearly driving this. It's implementable, it seems to be. So the second thing is, well, is it explaining the last half hour, or is it explaining just a sub sample or sub period? So let's look at the last 10 minutes. So I'm going to split that into I'm going to call it 3:30 to 3:50 and 3:50 to 4. Let's look at the last 10 minutes first. And here, again, the overnight return's explaining a big part of that last, or it's correlated at least with that last 10-minute return. Again, the first half-hour return doesn't seem to have anything to do with that. Everything looks pretty similar. And if we look at the 20 minutes before that, you do see something that's marginal, but it's not quite significant, and it's positive. So there's probably something going on there. So maybe we need to change our title again here and say the last 10 minutes. I don't know. Okay. But again, I don't think it really matters if it's the last 30 minutes or the last 10 minutes. I mean, it's a natural way to split things by the half hour. But you know, you get curious, and is it really the last 10 minutes, or is it the last 5 or 1, or what's going on here? So let's look at the last 1 minute. And so here's the last 1 minute. Now the point estimate's a lot smaller here. And you're talking about smaller periods here, the returns, it's hard to compare them. But there's significance, again, something's going on in that last minute. Okay. So maybe we should change the title again and say the 1 minute. But maybe not, because there is also something going on. I'm using 3:30 to 3:59, but it's probably in the last 9 minutes prior to the last minute. So there's something going on in the last 10 minutes, and even something in that last minute. Okay, so what is it? So what's going on? It could be consistent with Yufeng's stories. It's a little harder to tell because it's not coming from the 9:30 to 10 a.m. part. And by the way, if you look at the 12th half hour and try to explain the last 10 minutes, it doesn't seem to work. So it's coming in it's explaining 20 minutes before that. So these two effects, this overnight versus the 12th, seem to be separate. They're capturing something that's separate. Same thing if we look at the last minute. It doesn't seem to explain the 12th half hour, doesn't explain the last minute. They look kind of similar if you look at the last 29 minutes prior to the last minute. Okay, so what's going on? So there's an old paper by Larry Harris looking at the last trade, the last transaction. This is way back in the early 80s. The data comes from way back in the early 80s. And he says, you know, there's a huge change, there's a large change in prices on that last transaction. It's an important change. Is this somehow related? Well, I don't know that it necessarily is directly related because this is a long time ago and the market has changed quite a bit. The prices he finds are clustered around the ask, so there might be some transaction things going on, and you did a good job of showing that it wasn't really that, but maybe some. But we know that this is a very important price. This last transaction price is important. Of course, we think it's important because we use this as academics, but it's quoted in the press. It's used to calculate net asset value for mutual funds, which I think may explain what's going on. This is this is maybe an alternative story here. So how does this work? So the SPY traded on Amex until 2008, currently trades on the NYSE ARCA. Since 2003, when it was on Amex, they implemented this closing call option. All right, and NYSE had that even before. So you can submit these market orders on close or limit orders on close beginning at 9:30. Okay, so beginning at 9:30 a.m. you can submit these. Now, not until 3 o'clock, and if you go back in time, you know, historically that was later, would you have any idea if there was an imbalance if you're an investor? But now they're sort of publishing that by about 3 p.m. whether there's an imbalance in the orders market on either side. At 3:59, and again, if you go back in time, it was earlier, you can no longer put in these orders, you can't withdraw them. And then there's the auction. And so even before there was an auction, like in Amex, you had orders like this. They cleared in a different way. So maybe, and you can get some of this information on whether there's an imbalance, and maybe you could use some of these changes in the regulations to see if that affects the timing of these things. All right, so here's my story, and I don't know if it's necessarily any better than your stories, but I think you can test this. So mutual funds have, or they anticipate flows, inflows or outflows, I guess, based on what's going on overnight. And they may trade immediately, they may wait till the next day, they may wait a week, I don't know. But we can see some of this data. So they may choose to buy the close, they may use one of these orders, use the option. And so it might not be SPY, it might be other open-end mutual funds that are tracking the same index. And so you can look at the fund flow data. I did look at SPY. I couldn't see too much going on there. It could explain why these other commodities and currencies don't seem to give the same results, because maybe you don't see as many mutual funds in those classes. Okay, one last thing. this was out of curiosity. If you look at other predictability, you see maybe twice as many. These are the statistically significant at 10% or better. This would be what I'm predicting, and this would be what I'm using to predict. You see maybe twice as much, so there's something going on here. It's not just, I think, by chance that you're capturing this. I'm going to stop there. Interesting paper. I don't argue. I guess I'm trying to help and say that, look, I think you can maybe rule out some of these alternatives because I think you sort of need to get at what is the story here. I think that's going to help. Something's clearly happening, and I enjoyed reading.